You're trying to debate
Get
whether
everybody's attention, we'll go ahead and get started.
Those end up by drainage.
The teacher's not gonna be here.
She's out of town.
All righty. Councilmember Bryant, will you lead us in invocation?
Sure. Bow your head with me. Our Heavenly Father, we just come to you today and just thank you and praise you for your many, many blessings. We ask for your guidance and direction, dear Lord, not only as a council, but as the management of our city and the managers of our city and the various different departments that we all focus on our needs, dear Lord, here in our wonderful, beautiful city of Odessa, and help us to come up with some thoughts and some plans to improve this future that we have for our children and our grandchildren. Again, thank you for all your wonderful blessings. God and direct us this day in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
I'll turn the floor over to Michael.
Well, Council, we wanted to discuss with you this afternoon the Transportation Master Plan. As you know, you gave us the ability late last year to begin this process, and this is a process that I know Tom and I have talked about because we recognize that we have a lot of issues as it relates to transportation in our community. I think the most prevalent issues are the conditions of our roads, whether or not we need to start thinking of which roads need to be improved, expanded, and certainly we've got a lot of development, so we need to address those issues. I'm going to stop now and I'm headed over to Tom, and he's going to talk a little bit more detail, and then we're going to go through this presentation.
Appreciate it, thank you. Mayor, council, I think one of the things we wanted to do is try to keep council involved in the process that we've gone. So we've talked to you a couple of times on some of the things here, and we have basically kind of a three-step process here to move towards your being able to consider the product for adoption. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the CIP development, the Capital Improvements Program development. We'll have another presentation, and Jeff will go over this a little bit, but on maintenance types issues, and then we'll be coming to you after that with a final document. But so we still have some things we can do based on your comments or concerns or anything like that. But Jeff Whitaker is the lead engineer with the leader on the project. We're Kimley Horn. He's done excellent work for us. They've done a lot of work. Started down here last September, I guess, working on was it September, I guess, when we started working on the downtown portion of the project and those types of things. So, please
I'll
read
take
over.
over. Thanks, Tom. Well, I'm excited to be here. This is kind of the first glimpse of kind of one of the main parts. When we do a transportation master plan, where a lot of times is what projects are coming out of the master plan, what are the top capital improvement projects. That's really what we're going to focus on here today. As Tom said, in 2 weeks we'll be focused on the maintenance projects. Where are some of the maintenance projects we need? What's the maintenance plan? And then I think June 4th is when we're going to come back and kind of tie everything together with some policy, overall document, etc. So it's first of three steps to get you all kind of up to speed. It was a lot of information to tackle just in 1 hour, so we wanted to break it up over 3 different meetings. So today we're going to walk through the CIP development. We're going to give you an example project walkthrough, and we did this on every road, but we're going to start with Fodry Road, just to give you kind of what our thought process is as we were developing this. And then we'll go over the CIP list. We kind of programmed it year by year, so you can see what that looks like. So this was actually our CIP development project. The first step, we had to identify the projects. We basically came out here, drove every road in your system, really was trying to understand, based on your current master plan, based on the conditions of the road, based on the model volumes that we saw from the MPO, which is your planning organization, what projects should we actually evaluate? And I think we came up with 102 projects that we were going to evaluate. You also helped us in identifying projects. I think if you recall, you probably saw some presentations on a Wikimap, and we asked you to participate in that Wikimap service, and we had some staff participate in that as well. So that was our first step to identify the projects. Then we pre-screened the project. As I mentioned, we had 102 projects, and we knew that not all those were priority projects. Some of them, so we actually came up with a preliminary screening that says, okay, let's get the top projects. So everything I'm presenting today is the top of the top projects. So we still ranked them, but we didn't rank all 102 projects. We ranked the top roughly 40 projects, 35 projects. Then we came up with some scoring criteria to evaluate those projects. One of the things we wanted to do was be as close to the MPO's criteria, but Odessa specific. So we started with the MPO's criteria and said, okay, what do we want to change from the MPO's criteria to make it more fit the needs of Odessa? And I'll walk through that a little bit. Then we ranked each project, and we pretty much came to high, medium, low, short, middle, long. We ranked each project into 3 separate tiers. And what we were trying to say is when you actually look at this, and this is maybe my engineering side geeking out a little bit, there was like kind of a clean break line between tiers. So we said, really, if you're in tier 1, there's really not that much difference between the projects. There's one that does score the highest, and there's one that scores the third, but really the difference between first and third is not huge. So we were kind of saying, first tier is first tier, second tier, third tier is third tier. Now obviously, there's always some judgment when we do this criteria, but we try to separate the tiers and keep them in those tiers. Then we calculate costs. These are plan level cost estimates, and as you probably are aware, the cost estimates in West Texas are all over the place. Sometimes we do our best job of analyzing costs, so we actually used our planning cost estimates recently a lot of it was driven by University Boulevard that bid out. So we're making sure that we're actually putting appropriate costs, but the costs fluctuate a little bit, so they're kind of based on that. And then we developed a draft CIP list. We programmed a 10-year plan by priority and budget. So you'll see what that 10-year plan is currently. Obviously, fiscal constraints could come into play where we have to compress that 10-year plan or whatnot, but this was kind of our draft original plan. So the first step is identify projects. This is kind of a screenshot of the wiki map. These were just people, some staff that kind of came up with lines. So we were tracking what everyone was saying to make sure we were not missing something. We did go out in the field and reviewed everything. And we developed this map right here. This was what we called our universal projects. So you might see project numbers on here, like R101, R100. Those are just for us. We had to track it by something, so we tracked it by the project number we made up. So they mean nothing other than that happened to be the project that we ordered it in. But this was the universal projects that we came up with. So that was our first project. Then we pre-screened the projects. So if you can look at the map to the left and look at the right, those are the projects that came out of that pre-screening process. So some of the projects, if you see dashed lines on the left, a lot of those projects are for future development. For example, Yukon would be on here on the left. That's for future development, but it also could benefit, it could change traffic patterns up there and benefit existing folks too as well. So some of the projects dropped off because they were really for future development and future needs. So we came up with a pre-screening process. So to the right was those projects that made it through the initial process that we scored, that we would call all the projects on the right, the higher rated projects, and all the projects on the left were what we call the universal projects. Oops, I went the wrong way. Apologize for that. As I mentioned, we scored with priority criteria. The criteria on the left is the NPO. We tweaked it on the right for Odessa. As you can see, they look very similar, but we tweaked some of the questions just to make it more. One of the things that the NPO doesn't put a lot of emphasis on is maintenance. We felt that the conditions of the street was more important in Odessa maybe than the NPO is giving credit for. NPO is a lot about regional mobility and moving traffic. Maintenance may not be the concern, so we upped the value of maintenance a little bit on this criteria. We also update some of the socioeconomic factors, like is it in a state enterprise zone, opportunity zone, or historically underrepresented business? So we wanted to make sure we had that captured a little bit, maybe more accurately than, or more Odessa focused than the NPO did. So we allocated some points to that. But in alignment, we can go to the NPO and say, hey, we're in line with your goals. They've just been calibrated towards the city of Odessa. The buttons are backwards from what I think they should be. So here's just some example. Operational efficiencies, that we kept that actually matches pretty close. Is it on the thoroughfare plan? What's the congestion level? We used the model results for that, so we had very similar in that. Is it on the thoroughfare plan? I think it's the same points. So when we actually ran through that scoring criteria, this is what popped out to high, medium, and low. We only ran it for the pre-screening projects. So as I mentioned, these are the high of the low, still a high priority project, still made it through the pre-screening process, but all these are what transpired from that element. So these
May
are
I
just,
ask a
sure,
question?
go ahead.
Give me some bearings here. What are we looking at as
Sure.
far as? Tom, could you give me some bearings?
So this is where we're sitting right here.
Okay,
So this is Grand Avenue.
okay.
This is Murphy. This is Fodry. I'm sorry, that's Fodry, that's Yukon.
Okay, okay.
I can give you some more.
I got you.
This is the future proposed loop.
And so let me ask a question here. Right there south of Grant is what road? Is that where Dixie?
This is Dixie, correct?
That's a dead end to nowhere, with exception to, I believe, the fire station and whatnot, or why?
We're seeing a lot of industrial traffic down there, and then, eventually we would expect it to extend on down to the loop, but we have seen quite a bit of industrial traffic starting to develop.
It's also, it's in really poor shape too.
Bad
so.
shape, and it's,
Okay.
just a two-lane type of road.
But that's the feedback we also want to hear from you, like if some of these projects don't feel appropriate to you, that's what we're trying to get from this first meeting
Okay.
as far. But yeah, this is really to serve the industrial, very, very similar to Murphy too. Where there's some, a lot of industrial coming out there, and Murphy's in pretty bad shape as well. But that's exactly the type of quick comments we're looking for today. If there's something that, especially when we get into the specifics in a minute of each project, we'll show you the list and the project. And if there's something that doesn't sound right to you, we can go back and look at it and go to the drawing board.
No, it's not a matter of looking right, I just wanted to.
Yeah, one of the reasons is
Inquire.
this got points from some of the socioeconomic factors, and it's classified as one of your growth zones for industrial incubation, so when
what-
you actually look at the scoring criteria.
What
that's
makes you guys believe that it all of a sudden is going to be built out to the loop? What gives you that idea, Tom?
It's not that it's a plan that we figure at some point we would like for it to grow all the way to the loop. It's not that it's happening right now, but planning forward down the road.
Okay.
There aren't a lot of roads that extend straight down to the loop, especially in that area. You start to have.
Absolutely.
You've got, Grant continuing down, and you're gonna have 3503 over here, but then, that's about the central area there.
Thank you, by the way.
So then we calculate OPCC.
What is that, an acronym?
Sorry. So engineers is, if there's any attorneys here, we don't like to use the word cost estimates. It's opinion of probable construction cost. So it is a cost estimate, but it's a planning level cost estimate. Opinion of probable construction cost. That's a good question.
Now, an attorney would say that's a CYA.
But that's what it's an opinion of probable construction cost. So we did this, and like I said, we actually use bid tabs. We use bid tabs from university that was recently bid to make sure that we were close to understand what's going on. We also use some bid tabs from other projects from the area, from West Texas. All of our bid tabs that we used to calculate this were from the West Texas market, Lubbock, Odessa, Midland, to make sure that we were actually capturing this market, because it's very different than other markets that we were seeing. So we just developed cost estimates. So every project has we call these 10% planning level costs. We didn't actually go out design, survey, or anything, but they're 10% construction cost estimate.
Can we back up a couple slides?
Sure. When
I thought that, whoop,
this
I
one.
thought-
Okay.
Yukon was a bit of a priority, and it doesn't appear to be on this. Somehow it fell out of the priority list.
The roadway itself is a priority to us. A lot of development along Yukon would typically be defined as developer-based. So as the developer comes in, he participates and we participate in the roadway expansion and that type of thing. This portion will actually probably be that way as well. We're expecting this to happen pretty soon, so we're identifying it as trying to set some monies in our proposals so that we have money to participate. Otherwise, we don't have the monies. This is an area that we see improvements coming down the road. They're just not, it's not ranked in our top priorities right now.
So one of the things that we agreed upon as a technical staff is we were gonna run that prioritization and see what it came out to, but when we got to the programming of dollars, there's a few projects that are like a Yukon that we said, well, we know that's a medium priority today, but if we don't plan when development comes in there to have the money, it's gonna become a high priority as soon as the development happens. So we programmed that one a little bit ahead of some other projects just to be prepared for that. You'll see when the programming comes up that it actually jumps a little bit ahead of some of the high priority projects. Because the reason it performed as a median is because there's not quite anything out there yet. So when you actually look at the formula, like it's gonna happen. The reason it actually performed better than some of those other roads is because it does have a good impact to the system. But we'll talk about that in a little bit when we actually show you the actual, the program that we're gonna do. But this is the foundation of the program, and then we take these projects and we figure out what goes in what year and how does that look.
We can forecast some of these projects up as you desire. We have several of them that may be identified in cost estimates already, but may not have made this level of ranking.
Yeah.
But if you feel that something's more important than another area, then we can roll that up.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons we did pre-screening. We were trying to get to a list of projects. We felt comfortable that all these projects are priority projects. It's just trying to figure out what program we put it into.
Well, but also with that overpass isn't there yet, so that's really gonna restrict traffic until,
Yeah.
and that's 2 years out.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and you'll see when we programmed it, it's programmed beyond that 2-year window so that we know we don't need it till then. So we calculated the OPCC. We had maintenance projects, we had widening projects, and we had redesign projects. Really, what that means is you'll hear a lot about maintenance on the 28th, but some of your maintenance is rebuilding the roadways, much like university. When you rebuild the roadway, you're maintaining the project, but you're also improving the project. So some of the maintenance you'll see through reconstruction, and then widening and redesign. What really redesign means is, we had one project on 42nd Street was like some safety improvements. Should we have a raised median down there to, in between Chick-fil-A, I've spent some time at Chick-fil-A a few times. It's kind of, it's crazy to get out and what people do around there. So that was one of the redesign projects. It's like the road is wide, it's in pretty good shape, but maybe there's some redesign going
But
there.
isn't that TxDOT?
That is TxDOT.
TxDOT redesign.
And when you look at the cost estimates, we did not throw it in there.
It's not in
just
there,
yet.
but it was one of the projects we looked at. Yep. There are some cities that do take that on, so you don't have to though, but it could be a TxDOT project. So this is the compiled CIP program. I won't spend a lot of time on this because I want to come back to this. I'm going to walk you through Fodry. I'm going to walk you through a specific example. So I'm going to come back to this slide.
Do you have this printed out?
I do. We do.
Would you mind if,
Yeah, we were going to hand it out after we got through the presentation. We can hand it out now if you'd like.
well, I'm a note taker, and I can't see it very well either. No, I just,
Don't have the entire presentation printed out, but we have that slide on there.
Yeah, I've seen there's something.
And we can send a copy of it to you.
Yep. Let me know when y'all.
one more.
Oh. And so, I'm gonna run through the example project just to show you what, and we can focus on what you have in front of you. Is the first thing is we identified the projects. So Fodry was a project identified to be widened. We pre-screened it, it passed. So it was a pass or fail on pre-screening. Did it perform well or not? We scored it with criteria, and Fodry scored high. I can actually tell you Fodry, I believe, scored number 1. So because of all the indicators we had. It was 1 out of 32, so we ranked it, it was number 1. We calculated the OPCC, it's 13.9 million, that's for the 5-lane section. You'll see some numbers when you go through it that we have a cost for a 5-lane section and a 7-lane section, so they're different costs.
I think last time you saw a cost for the 7 lane,
Yeah,
if you remember from our last.
yeah,
That's what-
so,
Yeah.
So the 19.2 million is this same project?
This is the project, that one was for 7 lane, and this is for 5, right, Tom?
Yes.
correct. It's pretty common for cities to build out the first 5 lanes and then wait for the 7 lanes because you may not need 7 lanes for a while. So we changed, that was one of the changes we made probably since you saw the last. And then it's listed a high project. So we did this for all 32 projects that were ranked high. We did it for all the projects up to here, and from here to here, we did it for all 32.
Now, may I ask a question?
Yep.
With us in our initiative to develop downtown, why is not downtown, which is where's it at? I believe it was between 2nd and 8th Street. Why is that so far down the priority list? Why?
You want us to take a stab, right?
Sure. There's some complexities to that project. One, we don't own the roadway, so we don't just get to decide that we're gonna go do it. There's some, it'll be working out with TxDOT on doing the project. And right now, under the MPO, that project is a project that we're asking for funding through the MPO. And it's ranked real well, not because it shouldn't rank well, but surprisingly to us, because it's more of a local benefit than other ways. But they're reevaluating the scoring method right now. I'm kinda going through some things here, but anyway. The reason that it's, further down the list is that, one, TxDOT money is gonna have to come available. They're gonna have to work with us to either let us do the road in a certain way or take it over. And so it's not going to just happen overnight. That's part of the methodology of that.
Yeah, I did a project very similar to Grand Avenue in another city. It took about 3 years to work through some of the complexity, it being a TxDOT roadway versus city roadway, so we wanted to give ourselves the time. So that's why it's programmed in the year.
So Loop 338 is whose? Is that TxDOT as well?
Yes.
And Fodry? Is that
Audrey,
TxDOT?
no, Audrey's ours.
That's ours. Okay.
No.
North of 191, south of 191 is TxDOT.
Correct.
True.
I
Yes, sir.
believe the only project on here that's TxDOT is Grand Avenue right now. The Loop 3, you don't see the loop on here because one, it potentially might be towards the end of the 10-year window, but it's probably gonna be TxDOT too, so that's why it's not on here.
Well, I see East Loop 338 to North Fodry Road.
It's 56th Street though, that's just the parameter.
56th Street will be the road we work.
Okay.
So,
And the North Grand Avenue, which is 2nd to 10th, is in our high priority area. It's just shown as the last one on the list. Whether it happens last or not is not.
Let me get to the table that y'all are looking at. This is graphical version of the table you're looking at, that might be helpful. It's the graphical version, the years, so.
So in 2020, I know that in some of our discussions about funding and things we've been talking about, obviously Fodry is one of our top priorities. We've got an 800 unit apartment complex going in up here on Fodry. There are some indications of a high school that may be going up at Fodry and Yukon. I don't know if that's happening or not. But we are seeing, and of course, we've got housing development that's still growing up in that area. So, not only do we already have a need to improve that road, it's in poor condition, that, we need to do it fairly soon, and we're talking about the funds that we're trying to make available as being maybe a priority to address there. So that one's ranking in our 2020 schedule.
so last time when we were looking at our priority list and we were talking about grant, we said we put a little money in there in case we wanted to be able to throw some money in. But our concern was that if we took over Grant Street from 2nd to Kermit Highway, then it was ours.
It was
We
ours.
had it for the future, and so we would be better to
Work with Tex-
work with them. So the money that we had talked about, and this money here, was not even really to do everything that needed to be done, it was to share in that cost, right?
To have some money available so we can.
And am
work.
am I remembering correctly?
Yes.
Yeah. The dollar for, the downtown through Grand Avenue would be, the number reflected here currently would be the entire cost, but we could look at backing that down.
Well, what we had on our list
Yeah,
was,
this is a list you didn't see, this
Right.
was a separate list. And if you'll
the-
If you look at that list, the only roads that were common on that list that we're looking for were probably Fodry and
Fodry.
Grant Street.
which
All
was
these other roads-
19.2, yeah.
All these other roads are new, by the way.
Okay,
So if we take that from TxDOT, we actually take it from where?
second to Kermit.
Well,
Well, I
need
think we take it from where it comes into town. So, what is it, 57th is where, that's county? And then would it go all the way through town?
If
We
took-
said last time we only took it from 2nd to Kermit Highway.
The smallest segment that they will let us take would be 2nd to Kermit Highway, and the reason is, Kermit Highway is State Highway 450 coming in, and 2nd Street is Business 20.
I know there were some conversations before, and they said you had to take the whole thing.
Yes, there were,
And
early
so
on.
that's why I was like,
Well, 2nd to Kermit Highway sounded like a lot to have to take.
well, they were talking about Henderson
Yeah, all the way,
down.
yeah.
Yes, sir,
Yeah.
initially that was the
Okay.
conversation.
I think our best option on that would be to work cooperatively with TxDOT on that road.
And pay some money, sharing some of the cost, but, yeah.
And we're looking similarly on the south section. We could participate to some degree to help that part of the project.
South section of what?
From 2nd Street down to I-20 on Grant.
It's number 99.
Did we not discuss about that being the major corridor to downtown?
Yes, sir. Mhm.
Okay.
It's owned by TxDOT. Right now, it was ranking on the MPO scale. All these things are dynamic right now, and so if TxDOT ranks that project well, then MPO funds will come available. But those funds may not be completely attributable to everything we want to do, whether it be planters and things like that, or how that works. But if we contribute the money to that project, it has a lot better chance of occurring, and we can try and move it into the scale.
So in the entire document, which this is the screenshot to get opinion on it, we have a project sheet for each one of these, and it'll describe the project in detail. So like, for example, what you're talking about, South Grand Avenue, what that really is to improve aesthetics, landscaping, streetscape, lighting, et cetera, as you come into town. It's more of a beautification enhancement project, and that's why it's a long stretch of roadway, but you look at the cost per foot, it's a little bit less than the rest. It's still expensive cost, but it's really about enhancement.
And they won't pay for the pretty stuff, they'll pay for the street.
I got you.
And some of those are good projects that are, TxDOT's got green ribbon grants, which is for enhancements, and some grants you can get out there.
There may be ways for us to get monies assigned to it from TxDOT, but we don't have that yet. And so it's a jockeying of trying to make sure we can get the project as well as we can.
But I'll walk you through a little bit of this paper that you have in front of you. If you see in 2020, most of the projects that are really, in order to get the project going to construction, you gotta get it designed, surveyed, and planned. So we have Fadry, 56th Street, and Don Avenue as kind of, those are the projects to get designed so that they're ready to construct. And then,
Another reason, I'm sorry for that, is that, say, Dawn Avenue, there's still a lot of undeveloped property adjacent to Dawn Avenue. So if we have a design, this is what happened to us on 87th Street a few years ago. We built 87th Street, and we did it through a pro rata, so that the developers, when they came in, the problem was you couldn't just upgrade this segment in front of that development, because it wouldn't line up with any of the rest of the road. The drainage wouldn't work, the roadway wouldn't work. So we did the full 87th segment that we had to do there. And then when the developer came in, we just had them pay a portion of their contribution on the construction. So what we're looking at on, say, Dawn and 56th is to have that design so that when the developer comes in, we know what we need to do to build to what we need to do there.
yeah, and that's why the funds are programmed a little later too. So as development comes in, we can have that money, which we could utilize that to lower the funds.
And the other benefit of design is that you set the standard for what type of road, and quite frankly, to some degree, what types of either residential or commercial or retail establishments will go along that. Because if you leave it up and you don't have at least a design now, you could have a retail store pop up, you could have residential, all bumping up to a major road, and then all we have then at that point is another university. So,
Right, and then you'll also notice at the bottom, we have new signalized intersection, other intersection improvement. We thought it was important to program into the year. That basically gets you a signal a year, if you will, if you look at that, and then it gets you kind of a turn lane improvement. And those are kind of the easy things if a citizen calls, if you have the money programmed. We don't necessarily specifically identify. We have a list of, in another project, the intersections we think would be there, but it allows you to have the funds if someone needs a signal at a location or a turn lane improvements. And then at the bottom of each, and I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on the maintenance projects because as I mentioned earlier, on the minor maintenance, we have an entire presentation on the 28th related to that, but basically we had gone through and figured out in order to maintain a certain level of pavement index and quality on your local streets and collector streets, what amount of money should be allocated each year towards that. And so we'll have some comparison charts of that in a few weeks, but these are the results of that analysis. You're getting more detail. We're basically spending about $3 million a year on local streets through rehab, seal coat, overlays, and on collector arterials about $2 million. Now the thing about reason the collector arterials are lower is because a lot of the collector arterials are major reconstruction when you actually do them. You're not spending as much maintaining them, you're actually reconstructing those, while the local streets, you can get a better bang for your buck. Local streets end up lasting a little bit longer. You can maintain them and get a longer life out of them by minor maintenance. So that's what the bottom of it is, but like I mentioned, on the 28th, you'll have a presentation just focused on the maintenance. But that kind of walks through this. So 2021, we allocated project for construction on some of these projects, and then et cetera. When you see the $7 million for Yukon, that's actually the only number. We'll add this note on here. I realize it's not on here right now, but that $7 million is the anticipated city contribution per your subdivision ordinance for that cost. It's roughly 60% of the
Right.
cost of that roadway. So if the developer comes in, that's just to have the money ready for the developer. That's the,
Our contribution would be 60%.
roughly,
The 7 million.
the 7 million is the contribution.
Yo, just out of curiosity, I mean, looking at 2020 and 2021, why the Yukon project would be at 2020? Because it is a light there at Duluth. And maybe it would draw more traffic to take away from 56 or until that does get a light, because that's gonna be how far down the road?
It's gonna be next year.
Is it is next year?
Yeah, the light's going in very soon. The ranking on 56th is more about the condition of the road than the operation of the road. When we look at these 56th University, those roads are, this segment of University, when I look at it, it's starting to look very similar to the segment we're about to rebuild. And it's about the condition of the roadway, and I don't know how many years the roadway's gonna maintain. And 56 is similar, we're seeing the same kind of
52nd,
thing.
you mean.
No, 52nd, yeah. And then, but Yukon we can bring it up in the priorities as you need.
I just look at all the money we got, 2020 and then 21, big chunk,
Yes, sir.
you know, 7 million to 37 million.
But 2020 is less because really it's the timing of the design,
Mhm.
right? It's
Correct.
not that we're not,
Even if we were to move Yukon up a year, we would
still
have
have-
to design it, so, and for Yukon, we were just planning on that, and some of these may spill over to 2 years, so some of the 2021 may go into 2022, we haven't broken out that.
Could you
specific.
point me out where 52nd is? I know where it is, but I'm just trying to figure out exactly where we're
It's
talking
from
about.
JDS
It's grown since when?
Grown?
It's grown. I mean, I've seen the I was just out there not too long ago here, about a week or so ago.
Yes, sir.
And it looks like there has been a population boom, but when did that population boom begin? That's what I'd like to know.
I'd say within the last 5 years or so, I mean, you've seen a
And
lot
so-
more residential, and there's a new subdivision going up on 52nd right now. There's a lot of traffic coming down from Grandview onto 52nd. I think people use 52nd instead of 42nd.
instead of 42nd,
Yeah,
that's
so-
right.
So, and what's the lifespan on these roads that we work on? What is the lifespan we're talking about?
Typically, 20 years is what we're trying to do. But through the minor maintenance that we're recommending, we're hoping to expand that life to a 30-year. But 20 years typically, I don't know if,
So that road should be okay, in good condition, am I not correct? Or am I just, my thinking is off here, or somebody please, I'm just,
When was 52nd built, I guess?
Yeah, it's-
In the 50s or so? It's,
I
it's
lived
just
on
really.
52nd in the 80s. I mean, it's been there.
The traffic on it is just causing it to start, I mean, if you drive it and you look, you'll see the alligator cracking and the issues that are occurring on the roadway. And that's where, this is a blend of things from, conditions to traffic, the amount, volumes of traffic. 52nd, we're not intending to widen 52nd Street, it's a reconstruction. What happens is, of course, you hope you can do some maintenance, mill and overlay type, which is a fairly heavy maintenance, at a certain condition and get quite a few more years out of it. But eventually, the base starts to break down on you because of the loads, and he can tell you better than I can. But once that starts to happen, your roadway surface is not going to behave well, water's gonna start to penetrate, and you're eventually gonna have just a failing road altogether.
so when is the last time we had some preventive maintenance on this road?
Seal coat would probably be it, right?
We did a major job here what was it, a year or so ago? Did we not? On some of these
52nd
streets?
Street?
I don't wanna say 52nd, but I know
Right.
that we
Yeah, we
did
do it
this
every
year.
Well, we've been doing some just since we've been
seal
on it.
coats and.
20
so the,
'Cause our
at the
area
bottom where you
is-
see the minor maintenance, the 3 million and 2 million, that's been going on right now. I believe that you've been budgeting like 2.4 million a year, so we're not increasing that number significantly on some of those roads. So you've been doing that minor maintenance over the years. We just now have a formula to figure out how much that dollar should be, and we actually have a list of projects now, what projects that should go on. You know,
We will be requesting, and that part of the next presentation, but we will be requesting through the supplemental process to increase our maintenance monies. Right now it's at 2.4, and we're looking at requesting to increase that to 5.6. But that's for things like mill and overlay, additional seal coat work, and those types of things.
Isn't that apartment complex that's coming up right there at 52nd and almost to Grandview?
That's a residential.
Is that residential?
Yes, ma'am.
It's
About
huge.
100 and something
Okay,
units.
yeah, so that's gonna be no traffic on.
Yes, ma'am.
What was that number again, 2.4 to 5.6 for our maintenance?
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
yeah, it's the number at the bottom of here is 5.66. But that's not
And
a,
that's an annual ongoing item.
Talk really sweet to me.
It's sweet.
yeah. So there, and you know, when we looked at the 25 to 30, those were the projects that we didn't really program. We thought that those are important in the next 10 years, but we didn't want to put a year on that. So we kind of kept the ones that are in if you will, the next 5 years. We're kind of the ones that we're kind of programming. The other ones are ones that we want to keep considering, and the hope and the thought is, you know, most cities, once you have this developed, it's like every year we look at it, and projects are going to slide out a year, projects are going to move up a year, but this is kind of the roadmap, if you will, going over the next 10 years, and how do the projects slide and move out of that window.
We really wanted to present the system maintenance to you first, but the schedules just didn't work for us as a team. But the system maintenance, part of what you'll see there is we did the pavement condition index. And so that's a method which they drove on all of our arterials and then.
Every arterial and collector.
And then quite a bit of our residential, but about 33% probably altogether. And so they got a condition index for what our streets look like in general. Now, that condition index is about, what were we, 55? Anyway, so
56.
through statistical analysis and things that, I'm speaking more in what they probably could tell you better, but anyway, you can graph out what kind of monies would tend to indicate that you could either maintain your PCI or that you're going to lose your PCI. So if we stayed at 2.4 million, our PCI is gonna drop below 50, which is considered getting severe or bad. And then if we don't spend a certain amount of money, then certain amount of money will keep us steady, and then more will improve our position, our condition index.
And what you're seeing in a lot of Texas cities is similar to Odessa now, is you have a lot of subdivisions that were built somewhere between the 60s and the 80s, and you're getting towards where you're almost having to reinvest in all those roads that were built in those years. So you're seeing a lot of cities, if you look at the news, you'll see a lot of investment in roads. They're having both hit them right now. You're having a lot of growth needs, but a lot of maintenance needs. And that's something that most Texas cities haven't had to deal with, because they've either had to deal with growth needs and haven't had to worry about the maintenance because the roads weren't that old at that time, or at least they didn't have an abundant. Now most growing cities are dealing with both sides of the equation. What do we do with growth, and what do we do with maintenance? And it's kind of balancing that aspect, and it's getting
We're finding the
harder and
same
harder.
thing in the water and sewer, exactly
Yeah.
the same thing. Like, we've got tons of cast iron pipe in the system that's breaking on us, and yet we're needing to build water tanks and pipe systems.
Jeff, I want to be sure I understand, because the numbers that you put on here, are they what we would anticipate having to spend and then TxDOT is also spending? Or is this what we would have to spend if TxDOT didn't do anything? I'm unclear
all
about
these
that.
projects are entire project cost.
Okay.
Without TxDOT participation, the only exception to that right now is Yukon on here. Yukon's the only project that's not entire project cost.
And Yukon is based on developer contribution proportions of it.
So every other thing is all inclusive. That's something we can look at to see if, we just wanna try to figure out the right balance with TxDOT participating and put that on here. we can do that. Right now, it's entire project cost.
The south part of Grant is another one though. South part of Grant is less in improvements on the outside to rebuild the roadway. That's really a
what I was gonna say. I
textile
thought
roadway.
you said that. So South Grant is just enhancement,
Yes,
and Yukon is 60%,
correct,
and everything else is the entire cost.
correct.
Downtown Grant, what do we have on that?
It's about 7 million.
Yeah, downtown Grant, I think,
Thought that
to
was-
do all of what we were talking about, maybe 10 to 12 million. So, that's a number we'll reevaluate.
I thought we had
Part of it is
I need
we
to
have
recheck.
on-system projects, which are the interstates, the highways that come through. 42nd's one of them. TxDOT will fix those. But anything that's not on their system, they don't touch.
What about the
Which
South
just
Green,
is-
can you kind
It's
of
the
I'm
same.
just trying to decide our annual numbers.
South Grant, that's based on conditions and the roadway becoming, and we've got it broken down into several projects there, I think.
Right, you do.
Some of it's a mill and overlay, some of it's an actual full reconstruction.
Yes. Yeah, full reconstructions from Murphy to Clements.
For Murphy to Clements. It's getting pretty bad.
Yeah,
East
that-
of interstate.
I mean, that, yes, like, one of the things that we did different from the MPO, so when you run through the MPO scoring criteria, is that maintenance factor is not in there. It's such a low amount that they don't, so if you ran Crane through the MPOs, it probably wouldn't score as high. But because we weighted the maintenance portion of this, because we thought maintenance was important, because you drive on some of your streets, it's, you know, so that's why we were.
And they have a different account for the maintenance side that just goes directly to the TxDOT office, and that's,
Correct.
so.
And so they don't, they're all worried about widening projects, so you're kind of on your own for the maintenance, if you will, so.
There's and, you know, I'm always scattered in the way I talk about things. Talked a little bit last time about some of this major construction. I think we're identifying, and, you'll see that in another presentation, but if you were looking at optimal, we would be putting about 35 to 45 million is the numbers I'm thinking of.
For the maintenance?
That was reconstruction annually, right? That was for, and so, of course, we still have to see what the city's tolerance is, what the city is going to be able to do. But in terms of if you identify the 102 projects and trying to get those all into good shape and things like that, I think you were looking at about 35, 45 million a year.
For the collectors, it was 10, for the thoroughfare network, not your local street, it was 10 million a year. To get everything back up to, you know, starting point at some point in time, that's what it would be. Over a 20-year window, to get everything perfect shape, that's what it would be. But so
That's
now,
on the 35 projects
part of
or on
the-
the 101?
that's the entire system.
Yeah.
So to get the
System-wide.
whole system rehabbed,
Rehabbed,
10 million bucks a year for 20 years.
for non-local streets.
That would be from and the non-local streets needed about.
And that does not include new streets, that's only existing
Mhm.
streets.
Mhm.
And the local streets was about 25 million, I think.
Yeah, the local streets were more,
Because there are a lot more.
there's a
of
lot
them.
more local streets, and a lot of those streets are getting to their 50-year life.
So what streets are the 10 million a year?
Let's see if
What is a non-local street?
Um,
3 lanes and larger.
So if you see this map, and I know this, you're having, like, any of the really, really light colored streets are considered local streets, like this light gray.
Uh-huh.
Locals would generally be
Where
the
your
ones that
houses
their
are.
houses are.
Right.
Either 2-lane roadways with a side parking or
Yeah.
things like that,
Right.
are locals,
And non-locals are 3 lanes or more?
Yeah,
generally.
generally.
Okay, so for non-locals to maintain those would be 10 million a year for 20 years. And for local streets, to maintain those, it'd be an additional
About 25.
25?
The presentation on the 20th will have those exact numbers and the charts, but I think that's,
When we do that presentation, can we get a whole copy of the whole presentation?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, we can. We'll-
And if you can send us a copy of this.
We can absolutely do that.
That's major rehab work, that's not seal coat, that's not just doing some minor.
It's both.
milling over, yeah.
It's major rehab, and so it would be your entire.
That
maintenance
includes the
program.
5.66?
Mhm.
Okay.
And that's right Yeah, so that, right now, that number is 3 million a year on the bottom, right?
Correct. Yep.
And it needs to be 35 million?
And it's because that's just minor maintenance. We're not you're not reconstructing your local streets. So at some point in time, like if you drive around, I mean, you've probably seen some of the streets reconstructed. Some of them need to be ripped out and rebuilt.
So if you add that number with the number above, say, what do we got on 2020, we're looking at about,
556 and 7,
yeah, so,
12.69.
so you're looking at 2021, 37 million plus about 6 million, 42 million. So these costs are just distributed in a way that we can see them being possible to do, and possibly when we might need them, but funding is a whole nother issue.
Yes, it is.
How do we
Done-
get those monies?
Hadn't done sewer and water yet.
And this is not uncommon, like to your, most of the time what you'll see, like you ask the question of how long is the street life supposed to be? It's supposed to be 20 years, but if you look at most of the local streets, they're not rebuilt every 20 years.
Right.
No.
It's just not happening. So when you talk about that dollar amount, that's to follow what you're supposed to do. So then you have to say, okay, how are we gonna make this street last 50 years? Are we gonna do some seal coat and overlay? Are we gonna do this? So we come up with strategies, and that's really what the next president, what strategies that we're allocating $3 million a year on this number towards that allows us to push out the major jobs as long as possible.
Because the top number, the 37, for instance, in 2021, that's in addition to if we were doing our maintenance that you
Yeah.
just described,
To
right?
yes, to an extent, the bottom number is kind of what you would fund in your general fund, if you will.
Right.
And the top would be probably through some sort of COs or GOs or
Right,
an obligation.
but the 10 million or the 25 million a year would be in the bottom fund.
Correct.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were saying. I just wanted to be sure.
Tom, I noticed that West County Road wasn't on here, and I know that that road is.
County Road West is a state road.
State road.
Yes, sir.
And one of the reasons, I mean, we were debating on the order of this, a lot of what we were trying to get the maintenance to come for you first, to paint the framework for that, the way the schedule's worked out. We're doing on the 28th. But the benefit of giving this to you today is you can see that this is the program of projects. So we also encourage you to mark this up and coordinate with Hal or Tom of, hey, if there's changes to this, because this is our first draft of this, and this gives us some time to make changes to this.
So the plans that you gave us a couple of months back to look at that had what you thought our priorities were, and you asked us if these were our priorities, you know, that big. So I'm assuming is it similar to this?
This is generated off of those
Okay.
maps.
But that bigger one though, those were the tech stop projects, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
If you're talking about, the one with and there was almost a list of 200 on that. I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
That's Metropolitan Planning Organization.
NPO.
Those are projects, those are roadways that are owned by TxDOT. And then those include like the overpass or interchange at 52nd, 56th, or anything that is on TxDOT's roadways. This is separate. This may include a couple of those projects.
Like the South Grant, yeah.
Like the grant
Okay.
projects. But these are projects that are primarily city-owned
I'm
streets,
responsible.
and ones that we're concerned about the condition and how we're going to keep them from going
Okay.
badly.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question, is the 5.66 because of increased cost or increased needs? with
Increased needs.
additionals?
And we're adding roads every year, especially when it's growing this fast. Those roads age, but the roads that we had were already and y'all were very generous to us last year. We increased our road maintenance. Are we at 2.4 or 2.7? We do seal coat, 2.4. So I think we were at 1.7. Y'all gave us another 700,000, so we have 2.4 million. But if you look at the miles of streets that we have, and say, lots of places will program seal coat, not based on an analysis, kind of like we're trying to do here, but would say, we need to seal coat every 10 years. Well, if you divide our miles of streets by 10 years and put that kind of number to it, you know, it's not gonna get there. We're not gonna get them in 10 years. But we're not even just saying 10 years, we're looking at it based on what the conditioning looks like and how we need to try and keep up.
Are you saying we got poor roads?
So one of the things.
Better than some places though.
Well,
So-
is this,
So for the
is,
$660,000 that was calculated for signal operations and maintenance, we actually calculated that number based on your assets right now. So we looked at what assets you had in the city, and was it really cost to maintain these at the right level? And so the same thing for collectors and our local streets, except we had to like figure out, it's that curve that Tom was talking about, where on that curve should we be? So we actually made a scientific decision to come up with that number. And that's what these numbers are based on, of like, and you'll get a little bit of like, I don't know exactly where on the curve we are with the 5 million, but you'll see where we are on the curve with the 5 million. And that 660,000 was, actually, I believe you have 134 signals?
Yes.
I think that's the right number, and so it takes about $5,000 a year to maintain and operate each signal. So you can start doing the math on that and kind of where that lanes out, so.
so who does this work? Like this seal coat and rehab and stuff?
Contracted.
We
Do
bid
we
those out each
contract
year.
it? Okay.
Question, Michael mentioned West County Road and it's a state such as North Grant, right? How does that work? I mean, I know it's a state highway, but we've got city streets that are affected by it, we've got people coming off the interstate, it's terrible. Where do the talks begin to collaborate with maybe TxDOT to see what can happen there?
Part of that, it depends on what anyway, so when you look at the County Road West, if you need to rebuild the road because it's getting in bad condition or it's maintenance, that's TxDOT's function, really, to keep the road in good condition. But if you wanted to put in an overpass on it or something like that, that would be something that we would request through the Metropolitan Planning Organization for TxDOT to have done. And then it gets ranked with all the other projects that Midland has and we have, and TxDOT, depending on how it ranks and how much money actually comes down from the state. They calculate about 20 million, just under 20 million a year coming down from the state, so we have to distribute that money. So like I-20, the interchange with I-20 is part of a huge I-20 project. They're talking 800 million altogether. So the first phase, $400 million, and then doing $800 million.
The interchange of I-20 and where?
All the way along,
All
The entire corridor,
The whole
the other side of
entire
Midland, all the way
20?
to.
from 1936 to the other side of Midland.
Okay.
And so that's a huge project, but it's gonna be done in phases, but they're working for that federal money to get that done. So with County Road West, the maintenance of the road, rebuilding it through mill and overlay or something like that, is not something we would typically request through the MPO. That's something that TxDOT already has maintenance funds that they identify, and they say, we need to rebuild it, then they would assign those funds. We can request with TxDOT, we can probably put it on an MPO request list. It's just that's not normally the ones that you have on there.
And just a caveat on that, just how funding works is, I mean, we talk a lot about grant and how that is on the list and whatnot. But a lot of times TxDOT has more funding opportunities. They have 12 or 14 funding buckets. There's more funding opportunities for County Line Road because of the capacity improvements, the widening improvements. The type of project that Grant Avenue is, it limits the amount of buckets because it's really an economic development project, so they can't use every bucket that they have available to them. So that's one reason we programmed on your list is, you know, a lot of the other projects, they have other buckets to get, and the odds of getting funding are potentially more likely because of the more buckets they have to pull from.
It's a shell game. But anyway.
It's a shell game.
It is a shell game, but they're restricted on, you know,
Yeah, you can only use certain money.
certain money on certain projects.
There's a bridge category, you know, and then there's, but, so,
So I guess I'm asking also, as a city, and I know that's their affair, but if it's affecting us as a city, where do we talk about it with them?
We can go talk to John Speed, and they're the ones that do it locally.
Absolutely.
And just.
Yeah,
so
just
this
to
needs
let them know that we as a
but we
city
also
are
need to
concerned
address
about it.
second.
Right, right,
But yeah, it's different pots.
Okay.
And the maintenance comes out of this pot,
right,
and the MPO doesn't have control of this one.
Right,
They
I
just have it
understand.
for a few pots,
right.
and it's horrible.
but
But
we
we
can't
don't
talk.
have to talk through the NPO
No.
necessarily,
We just go, as-
to your
Right,
question.
right, that's what I'm saying.
we could do a resolution.
I personally feel that some of these, the priority of some of these, roads affects the future development of houses in certain districts and certain areas, so why are we not addressing that as well? in this?
And I'll tell you my perspective, but we don't typically identify money from my office, per se, to try and make something happen here. What I'm trying to do is meet the demands that are caused by wherever something's happening. And so, say Faudree right now, there's so much developing happening there right now. We're gonna be forced to do something before long. It's just becoming a safety concern, the roadway's in serious condition, and that type of thing. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do something in another area, but we only have, our money's one, the big thing that we're gonna have to go from here is, how much of this can we do? How much money can we get? See, I'm afraid that, in my opinion, and I wouldn't call myself an absolute expert at all, but this section of University scares me, because it looks very much, to me, starting to look very much like this section. And I mean, if we don't get University done over the next 2 years in the section we just bid, it's just gonna be potholes from one end to the other. 52nd is fairly similar. It's very much starting to look that way. And so there's a competition between money to keep the streets we have in decent shape and a money to pay for expansion. And that's one of the things where they're providing some information on opportunities of ways to try and fund these things, whether it be impact fees or other ways. That's just a term that comes up more than the others for some reason, but not that it's a good term, but.
On June 4th, we're gonna talk through some of the, unlike water and wastewater, you actually have a dedicated funding source. There's a utility source. You don't have that on roadway. So you gotta kind of figure out how you're gonna, either through grants or through the general fund, how you're gonna fund those projects. So, but we're gonna present options that are common out there and see, some of them may stick, some of them may not. But on the June 4th presentation, we'll talk a little bit about funding and different
So
options.
Jeff, when you say through grants, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand. When you say through grants, are you talking about through TxDOT and through, I mean,
Some
what
of them are
is-
through
what
TxDOT,
kind
some
of
are through
grant?
NPOs, there are some federal grants, like a Main Street grant, that could be something if Grant Avenue was in Main Street,
Okay.
that you could get a grant through a Main Street grant.
Okay.
Most of them are federally funded, most of them are through TxDOT and the NPO, but there are some other sources.
Okay.
And they can be very competitive.
Yes.
But say like, if there are projects, and that's part of the reason we wanna bring these to you, if there are projects that you want us to try and identify, whether it be for future development or other reasons, we will build them in. We're not trying to restrict any projects, these are just ones that, in our minds, and from the WikiLeaks map and from other things that are appearing, coming. Say this one on Yukon, the issue is, once they build this interchange, and the developers are already moving along here on this side of Yukon, of Faudree. Once that interchange is in, we're expecting the developers are gonna be coming to us and say, we're putting a subdivision here. Well, when they do, we are obligated to pay for a portion of the street a big part of the time. And so, if we don't have any money set aside, we're still gonna have to have money. That or we're gonna tell them, you can't do it. And, that's.
So you're anticipating them coming to you, asking for money, asking us to do this and do that. But just a second ago, when I said about developing in other districts and things like that, you said that we don't necessarily do this and we don't necessarily do that.
If the developer here
I
comes
just
to
want to have
me,
some understanding here.
right, if the developer here comes to us and he's ready to start putting in a road, we still have to participate. We just don't have anything telling us that developer is planning to go in there right now. In other words, I don't have anything that tells me.
But you're
something.
anticipating up there.
I think there's some
Right.
anticipation on Murphy that some of that
That's
industrial.
how I'm trying to understand, please, help me.
All righty, it is 4:59.
No, I need.
Okay, we've got 1 minute, and then we can do it.
Murphy's similar, as he's saying, that's part of the reason we're identifying Murphy. because of industrial developments and things out there, but the issue there is, we know we have development. You see the houses,
It's already
big
occurred.
housing. We have developers that are planning to develop this, this is what they're telling us.
I think one,
And,
I'll chime a little bit just on Yukon specific. One of the things that we saw from the model of Yukon actually helps today too. So that's, if there were roads out here that we knew that, anywhere in the city, if we knew that making that connection could help today, it would still prioritize a median because it's still development driven, but, what we saw is Yukon could potentially relieve some of these other roads in the future, especially when that interchange is done. So we, that's one of the reasons Yukon popped up, that
Thank
road
you, Tom.
specifically.
I appreciate it.
but yeah, any road that y'all want us to look at, we will put on.
And you'll send us this?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, it's 5 o'clock, so thank you very much if you would
Thank
send us
y'all.
that
I appreciate it.
presentation. Okay, now we will move into the council briefing. Tom, do you mind doing the invitation?
I will.
Most gracious God, we thank you for being here with us this afternoon and for caring for us and for guiding us. We pray, Heavenly Father, that we have an open mind and can hear what you have for us to say. We pray the things we do will be beneficial to our citizens and those that come to visit. In Christ's name I pray, amen.
Amen. On to review council agenda items.
Being passed out now.
Invitation to be by Lynn Money. Councilmember Bryant will do the pledges. We do have a couple of proclamations. One is for Texas Scholar, the other one is Motorcycle Awareness Month. Then we will move to the consent agenda. Is there anything anybody wants to pull off? Or
Mayor, if you don't mind, I think it might be worth noting to pull off K, that's the funding that council discussed regarding the census. Maybe a good opportunity to show that the city is certainly behind the effort and to the extent that we're also providing some dollars for it. So Philip will get up and make that presentation.
Okay. Anything else we'd like to see pulled off? Okay, then we move to other council actions. Approval of downtown infrastructure and facade grants.
I have one question, and I didn't understand, there were so many things in there in regards to the tax lien. There were tax liens that had been filed, have those all been taken care of?
On the facade ones?
Look at page, let me go to where I was. I'm assuming that's what it comes, Ector County et al. Versus Glenn Hawson. Page, whatever page that is. And there was two of them in there on that one piece of property, I believe it was, and I mean, that's fine and good, I just wanted to make sure they were all taken care of. I didn't understand why they were in there anyway. Cause there's a judgment.
Yeah, Natasha, are you aware of any?
I'm not aware of any, but we'll look into it.
Yeah, I'm concerned why those are even in there. There is a judgment in the amount of, even the city has nearly a $4,000 judgment.
Which one is that one?
It's on page 128, I believe it is, 127 is one of them. Then I saw another one in there, and I can't remember the exact page, but I think it did with the same property.
Okay.
I just wanna make sure it's taken care of. I wanna make sure we got our money.
Okay.
Before you ask, you gotta pay. Okay. We have to leave the table these until we know.
I think we can find an answer, because I know some of these folks have been
Yeah,
waiting
they've
for
been
some
waiting for a
time.
long time.
Okay.
I think this is on that Allen Nees
Allen
property,
Nees,
does
yes,
that
sir.
sound right?
Yes, sir, you are right.
So I think it's just that one, Tasha, that Allen Nees property, if you can just kind of get somebody to find that out, that would be great.
Okay.
I honestly would like to know what's the stipulations behind these grants, because a lot of these buildings are extremely old. And so I think I made this comment during the ODC meeting, to where it's more or less we're sticking lipstick on a pig, so to speak. If the building is old and there's a lot of issues and things like that inside of the building, how is just making the outside look pretty going to help us long-term
Sure.
for the future?
Well, that's on the facade grant, on the infrastructure grant, they would still have to make everything code compliant before they're opening. So let's say someone went into one of these buildings and wanted to open up a restaurant. That person would have to meet every condition under the code before the city would issue a certificate of occupancy for that building. And that would mean that everything in there would have to be brought up to today's current code. So by extension, Mr. Hamilton, that building would be brought up, because otherwise it would not be able to open.
In the meantime, it looks good on the outside.
Anytime it's gonna-
Agreed, Eli.
Well, and that Alanice thing, I mean, a whole lot of what they're doing, you know, rebuild the roof, build bathroom walls, rewire the building and stuff. I mean, that's some serious reconstruction, rehab.
Well, it's cheaper than us tearing it down and then having to put the demo cost into the land cost and get somebody else to build something there.
Well, I mean, the greater benefit is that not only have you saved the structure, but you're also providing an opportunity for a business to open up in downtown.
Okay, other questions? And we have appointment of boards. If you will look through that. Board of Survey,
They might not approve it.
I haven't heard from him.
Which one am I thinking about?
He never said.
Planning and zoning?
I haven't received
Did
an
not?
application.
Okay, all right.
Citizens Golf Committee, District 1. Downtown Odessa, District 24, do we have anything for those?
The two I've asked have all turned me down, so. We did
We
get,
have some applications, so I can forward those to you
yeah,
again
if
tomorrow.
you would, I'd appreciate it.
People don't
I know
wanna
we
do it.
received some.
We got a number of the young adults.
YPO.
YPO that
Yes.
wanted to serve, so.
Why don't you send all those out
Right,
again?
if we
I
can
will.
get them to
Okay.
serve.
Parks and Rec, District 1, Lori Light, and I'm gonna appoint somebody from YPO. P and Z, District 1 and 3. Any recommendations there?
That's a pretty important one too,
What's that again?
PNC,
Planning
planning and zoning.
Yeah, I have some money in mind. I'll,
Okay.
get back on that.
Anything for Traffic Advisory or Zoning Board of Adjustments?
That zoning board of adjustments, I couldn't figure out exactly, what does that do? I
They
was
don't meet
reading,
very often, I don't believe.
Yeah, they, when someone has a, what's the term I'm looking for?
Dilapidated structure, maybe?
No, ZBA.
Oh,
When
ZBA.
when they have an issue with, when they wanna appeal a zoning, rule, that's typically the board.
this is the group
that
that
hears it.
would
Yes, ma'am.
hear that.
Yes, ma'am. So someone wants a variance on a sign, or someone wants a variance on a setback. The ZBA is the board that would typically hear those cases.
Cause I still haven't put anybody there, I wasn't sure what kind of person I
Yeah,
was looking for.
We've got a description for that, and we
I
can send
forward
that to you, so you can have that specifically.
And that's
updated.
usually the only time they meet.
Yeah, it's very
Because they're not
rarely.
up there.
Is
Very
it,
rare.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Odessa Housing Finance Court,
Actually, isn't that the position that we were talking about, Philip or something like that? Is that what we were talking about last time we met?
That's a position that I used to serve on that board. I've rolled off of that board.
And you were trying to put Philip there? Is that the one?
That would be our recommendation, primarily because I think it's a great fit to have someone from the city, because the two organizations work well, and to have someone there that can make a quick decision and not hold up a project and move the project forward, I think would be beneficial.
I actually would like to serve on that board. This is council, right? Can we not place a council member on that board? Odessa Housing Finance Corp?
Norman, do you know the answer to that question?
I'm asking.
Odessa Housing Finance Corp is actually a separate entity.
It has its own bylaws.
We don't give them any money. So.
But is this a council representative on
No,
it? or is-
anybody from the council can suggest an appointment to serve on that
But is there a reason why council, is there a reason why Malcolm wouldn't
I
qualify?
need to check the bylaws.
Since we don't finance it correctly.
All right.
I
Why don't
need
you
to
pull
check
the bylaws, let's,
Okay.
and shoot a copy of those out and come to.
Okay, will do.
Thank you.
Housing
That's
Authority.
really important now too,
Absolutely.
with that 5 million and with all the housing issues.
Absolutely.
That's important.
Housing Authority, I'm putting all three of these back on. So, and that's it.
Those have been taken care of. I forgot, I did email Mark Flowers regarding it, we looked into that.
Good
so
deal, thank you.
Has been taken care of.
Okay.
That was on that Ellen, correct?
That was a quick one.
All right. Item 3, Permian Strategic Partnership.
All right, well,
Tom.
I'll get it for you.
She did so good.
Golly, thanks guys. I was just.
Anybody else would like something to
Kind of
drink?
discreetly trying to get some of it.
That escalated.
Okay, fellas.
What would you like to drink?
Just water.
Water.
Thank you.
Let me remove it.
like a fireman's watch.
That's what happens.
Yes.
I know who picked it up.
Who's that?
I don't know, you told me one time that your wife picked out
Oh,
all of your
yeah,
clothes.
she used to pick out
You
all my
said
clothes.
you
Yeah.
picked them
You
all
don't wanna walk home
out.
and go, you're gonna wear that?
Yeah.
No, I'm just putting this on until I wear it.
She did pick out all my clothes. That's true. That's true. I take the credit for it, but
Ask Kim, but
Oh, I'm gonna sit right here.
He's drying on you.
I'm gonna sit
Where's
right
PD?
behind you.
Michael, can you get PD in here?
Council, let me introduce Michael Wise. Michael Wise is with the Permian Basin Strategic Partnership. We've been anxious to bring this group before you. The PSP is working on some exciting stuff. And I don't want to say anything about term, but certainly to work with the communities that the companies that are part of PSP have a presence in. So I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to introduce Michael Wise and he's going to introduce his team. And then he's going to walk us through a presentation. So thanks, Michael.
Thanks very much, Michael, and thank you all for giving us the opportunity to address you here today. I'm blessed to have a group of my member company employees here with us. And so Clint Williamson from Occidental, Kristen Ditto from Concho, Haley Dunn from Chevron, and Courtney Wardlaw from XDO, who needs no introduction around these parts, I think. So we've been looking forward to chatting with y'all. The PSP has been, came on November 1st, I was the first employee. It's been a crazy couple months, but we are pleased to tell you that we hired a CEO last month, and we are further growing our staff, and you'll be hearing a lot more from us here in the near future. But what is the PSP? So, as you all know, the oil and gas industry has experienced rapid growth in the last couple of years, and it's had a tremendous impact on the communities of the Permian Basin. Collectively, the executives of our 20-member companies came together and identified that the challenges that have been placed on the communities were the single biggest risk to their businesses. The challenges in hiring and retaining good employees, their employees' challenges in finding affordable housing, the ability to attract folks to the basin was a big threat to their ongoing business plans. With that in mind, they hired an outside consulting firm named McKinsey & Company, which is a global consulting firm that did a couple-month-long study to understand from the outside in what the greatest challenges were, and to accessing all publicly available data, and we did over 40 interviews across the region. I say we because I was an employee of McKinsey & Company before I was an employee of the PSP. And so some of the materials that we have here today were a culmination of that effort, and then a second McKinsey effort that the PSP, once they were officially created at the end of the year. So that's where we are. go back. So if we go back 10 years, Permian Basin was producing less than 1 million barrels of oil a day. By 2017, that had doubled to 2 million. Where we stand here today, it's over 4 million barrels a day. Our expectation is that this will grow to 6 to 8 million barrels a day over the next decade. What does that mean? It means continued industry traffic, continued population growth, all of the above. And so we, recognizing these challenges that came together, we want to work with stakeholders like you to address what we call the public infrastructure deficits. Our focus areas are public education, healthcare, housing, workforce development, and road safety. Where we stand now are, we have 5 committees dedicated to those 5 focus areas. They're populated by our folks here in the room and other employees of member companies, and a small PSP staff that supports them. Just a little bit about the research that was done. You all have lived through a number of boom and bust cycles, I'm sure, and if we're gonna come out here and say that industry growth is going to continue over the next 10 years, we wanted to have data to be able to back that up. And so McKinsey took a global supply and demand model, looking at all the basins throughout the world, all the producers of oil, and what the oil demand is likely to do, and modeled it across 3 scenarios. As you'll see, in all 3 scenarios, growth continues, albeit at a different trajectory. So we could have done this for gas production as well, but we just chose oil production to make it simple. Here we are, 2019, 4 million barrels a day, and like I said, anywhere between 6 to 8 million barrels per day in our base case and our aggressive cases. Let me say that we've made this chart a few times, and I think everyone's estimations of growth in the Permian Basin has been understated. Everyone's underestimated the growth that has continued to happen. The key point here, I would say, is that one, it's almost all conventional, so horizontal fracking, and there's going to be growth in both the Midland and the Delaware Basin. This is a slide I have had to remake a number of times, which, due to when I first made it, it was 2.4 million barrels a day when we first did the research. Later on last year, it was 3.7, 3.8. Now if the Permian Basin was its own country, is what this is saying, is it would be the 8th or 9th ranked country in the world as far as oil production. We expect this to grow to be if the Permian was its own country. The U.S. is already the largest producer of oil and gas, but we expect it to grow to the 4th largest overall. This was not expected. The technology advancement has brought more resources that became economically viable. Part of our efforts at the end of last year with McKinsey was to take these 5 focus areas, and we met with folks across these communities in these areas, and we tried to define, because these are all very challenging problems, and we know we don't run hospitals, we don't pave roads, we don't run cities. These are oil and gas companies, and so it's all around partnership for us. And so we got together with McKinsey and tried to define what the mission statements for each of these committees would do, where they would spend their efforts. And so based on that efforts, the committees have split into subcommittees, either based on region or function, so that we can best address best work together with communities to address these challenges. This is an immense opportunity, not only for the state of Texas, but the nation and these communities. And part of the goal we have is taking your guys' case of the economics to Austin and to Washington, D.C., so that they know that when it comes to federal dollars and state dollars, the Permian Basin deserves more than its fair share, because there's a lot riding on it. The national security of the country, the energy independence of the country, it's all happening right here. And so part of the PSP's goals is outward facing to the state and federal government, but the majority of it is here to work with folks like y'all to understand the challenges and ideally co-design, co-develop initiatives that we can help fund. We didn't mention that. Our 20 companies have committed over $100 million over the next 5 years across the Permian Basin. So we want to work with you to develop and fund initiatives to help address these issues. You can find more information on our website, permianpartnership.org. It will be updated soon. It will be updated more soon. It hasn't changed a lot lately. And then info@permianpartnership.org is a good address to reach out with any general questions. But I am Michael at permianpartnership.org if you want to reach me directly. And I want to let you know that you have a direct line to me if there's any concerns you have about anything we're working on or ideas. I want to offer that up to you. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, anything at all. And I'll open it to my group. Do you guys have anything you want to add there? Or?
Question.
Okay.
Yeah, Michael, I think we're also appreciative for you all to be here. But it's almost a daunting task. We're not, because we could sit here and tell you our needs in all of these areas. And I think that we don't really know how to access this money. We don't know what your process is yet. We don't understand it. For instance, housing. You know, we've got a really good initiative, some momentum starting, and we'd really like some support on housing. But, and I think that's your area, isn't it? Are you head of the whole thing?
I'm not the head of the whole thing, but most of these focus areas, the 5 focus areas, I have some influence on.
Some influence on, okay. For some reason, I had you connected with housing, so, I mean, kind of, would you walk us through how you all see the process?
Sure.
Because, you know, I keep hearing that you don't want to piece out money and you don't want to have 100 projects come to you for $1 million here, $1 million there. How do you envision this
Sure.
working?
It's a good question. And so with housing specifically, I'd say we've been in a very much information gathering mode. We met with Michael and David 2 weeks ago now, just to understand the efforts that were kind of going on. I would say in our investments, we aim to be really strategic in nature, and so a single project is unless it has broad community impact, is probably not the right use of PSP funds. It would be difficult for us to get that to our board, but we're working with investors, working with the cities to understand. Our understanding is that surface is, land is one of the greatest challenges, and so I think that a lot of our efforts will revolve around either working with our member companies or with the city, or to find a way to create more developable land. It's not a great answer to your question, but I would say that as the Housing Odessa Workers progresses and develops capital needs and plans and projects, I think that's a place where we'd like to come in and offer some input and ideally, come to a way that we can support it.
So we have a wonderful project that the Odessa Housing Authority did, and it's a low-income housing unit out off of, what's it off of?
87.
87. And then they've got like 40 some odd acres out there. And so they are ready to do now the second project, and this is a wonderful, wonderful project. And it's going to be more workforce housing instead of affordable housing. It's gonna be workforce housing. And, there's some bridge money that is, the investors are willing to do stuff. They're probably looking for $6-8 million. Is that a one-off you're talking about that you don't do, or something that you would be interested in for 200 and some odd?
We would, I think.
That's who we're meeting with
Yeah, we're meeting
tomorrow.
with them on Wednesday.
We're gonna meet
To
with
talk
them
about that project.
tomorrow afternoon with Jill and Cruz Castillo and that whole
Okay.
group tomorrow afternoon.
We would love to be in
with
a
our
place
consultant.
where we recycle the capital, where we find things like bridge financing that opens up more development. We are very much focused on the missing middle, so to speak, so that teachers can find a place to live, healthcare employees can find a place to live, first responders, those folks, because as long as city workers, that we recognize that's the backbone of the community, and so folks that fall into that realm, housing targeted towards them is somewhere we'd like to help.
I think it's just sort of confusing to us because, like that, for instance, okay, that is a request from Odessa,
Mhm.
you know, from one group. And then, you know, there might be multiple, I mean, how do you funnel those? I mean, how do you understand my question? It's just, I'm on so many different groups that are
Yeah.
all wondering how they can get some money from you. And I'm just curious, you know, cause there's not a central group that is getting all the ideas to come to you as a group. There's multiple different groups working on requests.
I would say that
Yeah.
we're writing the book now on how to do this. No one's ever come together as corporations to fund something like this, and so we're learning as well, and we ask a little bit of patience there, but our 5 committees are the right place to start, and so, I'm happy if anyone wants to email me, I'll introduce you to those committee leaders that can then facilitate meetings to say, our housing committee wants to talk about this, our roads committee wants to talk about that. And so that's working at a committee level, we envision being very much bottoms up. Like no one's gonna come to Secretary Evans and ask for money and that, like it's gonna be a bottoms up.
Right,
We're
right.
working shoulder to shoulder to co-develop these things. And so the committees is the right place to start, and I'm happy to provide facilitation and access.
Peggy, if you need help navigating that, and Kaylee and I are here representing kind of the Odessa stakeholders. So
Okay, yeah.
either one of us can
Cause you know,
help you
like the
navigate and
chamber's
get where
got,
you need to,
you know,
right.
everybody's got some ideas and everybody was sort of afraid to start approaching because they didn't want, you know, it needed to be something that was the most important. If we weren't gonna get a whole bunch of ask, we wanted to be judicious on our ask, if you will.
And
Yeah.
I would ask, and Michael, I'm sure you're going the same place, but invite us to the table early, run ideas past us. We're very willing to come and sit down and hear ideas and kind of co-create things together. To your point,
Okay.
we're not going to be able to probably do 15 initiatives in the next year,
Sure.
just Odessa, but within the working groups and all the focus areas, there are people that are very, very willing to sit down and talk and at least have that conversation with you. I'd also say that a lot of these companies are going to be your stakeholders in general. This is a lot of our jobs to kind of engage and work on these things, and so we do appreciate the ability to provide input, but also work together on some of these things. So.
And just to dispel any notion or fear, we don't have an allocated amount for Odessa versus Pecos versus Carlsbad. We are sensitive to wanting to have broad impact, but I think however we calculate the return on investment, the greatest impact, like don't think that if you bring us $1 million investment and it's the wrong one and it's taking it out of your budget. That's not the way we're looking at it.
Okay.
And so.
So on roads, I either read or I was told that you're putting a lot of emphasis like on 302 or those roads. Is that true? Have you decided anything on roads yet?
We have been working very closely with John Speed, the Odessa District Engineer, to identify all the regional needs. We have not been to a place yet where we're very focused on a specific roadway. We're trying to support their efforts to get more resources and get more money. It culminated in Chairman Bruce Bugg, who's visiting next week from TxDOT, visiting the Permian Basin, sent a list of $2.5 billion in roads to Washington, saying this is what the Permian Basin needs as far as not city infrastructure, but DOT infrastructure. These are the improvements, these are the unfunded things that are necessary to help the region grow. And so that was asked for from DC, and we helped them provide it. And so we are not, roads is really tough because you could spend a lot of money very quickly and just pave one road. And so I think we're looking to be advocates on your behalf and on the region's behalf, and where possible to bring other stakeholders to the table with expertise or with efficiencies or whatever that could be. But it's going to be hard for us to pave a bunch of roads. It's probably not going to be in our wheelhouse.
I guess my question as much as anything, and again, I appreciate y'all being here. I appreciate the program. But I've heard this story how many times, you know, I mean, I've been to at least 3 different meetings.
Sure.
And our need is now. And we're trying to find out reason, and you mentioned being in front of the legislature. Well, it's about over with. You've got another 2 years we're gonna wait.
Yep.
And I do appreciate the fact that the energy there to organize, but, you know, our plan is, I don't understand a plan as such when we have 2.4 million today budgeted for maintenance, and we need 5.6 next year. And that's just in that one area of roads and maintenance on roads. So I guess we've talked about 87th Street before. I think we've been a part of the conversation before, but we need some action. You know, it's kind of like anything else. We need some proof in the pudding.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get something done, you know, and then let's talk about PSP. And I'd just like to see some action. I appreciate the you know, but I've been to 4 meetings and I'm still waiting for that first, here we go, you know, let's go.
Well, that's why I was asking about the process, because everyone's so, you know, how do we,
Well,
how do we get you to do something with
Well, I
this?
think it's difficult because you do have 20 member companies, that's 20 CEOs that sit on a board. It's hard enough to get 7 council members to agree on something. You're talking about 20 CEOs of companies to agree on something that all
But I
have the
don't
same
wanna-
service areas.
I wouldn't wanna, let's not make excuses for us, right? Like we are eager, our board is just as eager as you guys are for action. I hear about it on a daily basis. We're keen to get after it with you. We understand that we launched a few months ago and you haven't heard anything yet. I would ask, we are just scaling up now. We have a CEO on the ground. We're hiring a few more employees. I promise you, and if we're back here in a month and you don't know, if you haven't seen a win yet, then something went
I'm
terribly
putting
wrong.
you on the calendar.
Yeah, put me on the calendar. But no, we're right there with you.
And I've got to ask a question, and clarify if this is correct. You're talking about $100 million over the next 5 years for 20 companies.
I'm gonna say over $100 million, but yeah, it's
Okay. I mean, that equates to about $1 million per company per year. Is that right?
$1 to $2 million.
About 2.
Yeah. And so, this is unprecedented for industry to come together.
Sure.
Oh,
in
I
this
don't
way.
disagree.
Uh,
I mean, it's a lot of unprecedented, and it's a lot of unprecedented times right now, you know, with what we're experiencing as a city. And, don't get me wrong, I'm glad we're unprecedented moving forward, but I'm just state facts.
And just a note on that investment, so that is in addition to what we're already doing as companies in the community, all of the projects and the nonprofits that we support. That money is intended to be a seed or a catalyst to more. So we're trying to use that money in our relationships to bring in more focus here and bring in some foundations and investment companies and groups that have had their eye on the Permian Basin but never actually stepped foot in here. So we're really trying to use that money to open the door to a lot more. So I wouldn't think of it as that dollar figure. I'd think of it as that's the initial commitment that the companies have made to seeing this through.
And we're sending $4 billion a year back to Austin, which we are supporting bringing some of that further back in separate taxes. And so like Kristen said, a catalyst, seed capital. We want to help projects that would otherwise struggle, that could have a big impact in the communities, get over the top. We're not gonna. There's no way we can fund all of it. Like we can't give it, but that's where we aim to play.
There's a great project that YMCA has on Pagewood. We can't even get a bid to improve the property in order to provide, childcare for the workers. That would seem to me like that would be up front and up. We got the projects, It's just that a month from now, I'm holding it to it.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Other question? Got a question. This is one that's been posed to me. It was from Bloomberg. And I'll read you this paragraph. So Midland is using a $100 million bond to fix overused roads and accessing $180 million regional fund from a new coalition of 20 drillers for other advances, he says. When it says accessing, has our money gone out of the fund?
No checks have been written yet. that was,
I got phone calls left and right that
Yeah.
said, oh my God, going out here,
let me make it abundantly clear that you guys aren't, no one has a head start when it comes to this kind of stuff. It's, I think folks in interviews have, can say things and can get
Why
construed in
not?
certain ways.
That's
So,
why I was
yeah,
asking.
No, there's no, we're, wide open.
Okay.
No money's left at the table yet.
So you guys are not met on any specific area, any specific district, or any specific project as of this point?
Sorry, have we met?
Right, you said you met with mayor and,
Oh, right.
yeah.
So I don't think
No,
we agreed to
we-
come back and visit on,
So, yeah, our discussion was, kind of what we were viewing as the housing needs in Odessa. Obviously, housing for workforce individuals was our greatest needs. We talked about some of our projects that we are currently looking at. Obviously, the project that we're doing on Fitchin Avenue at Emeco, the 30-unit development. We've talked about the fact that we had a property that we're gonna put out for RFP that's also in that same area. And then I think the one that was probably most appealing to you was the fact that we were looking at specifically identifying vacant property, specifically in District 1, because that had the greatest availability of property, figuring out a process to maybe acquire those, and then through some process offer those for development of housing.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
Who's the councilman of District 1?
That would be you, sir.
And you wouldn't think to include me in that meeting, if that's the case, Michael?
I did not at that moment, no, sir.
Okay.
okay, other questions?
So the project that you showed, that we talked about last time, that was that land that we
Yes.
found
Yes, ma'am.
in District 1,
That is
No,
that kind
It was
of,
not found. The developer came to me and asked me, and then I went to Michael. I sent him to Michael at that point. So we didn't find anything. And then I went to Michael and said, and just to be clear, I stated, what about city property that we had? And then all of a sudden, I guess we're here. But again, I'm not included in these meetings all of a sudden, and I don't know who's picking and choosing that. And that's very upsetting and very disenchanting.
Well, I think, with Baker, we're looking at the opportunities, these things were brought all together, all across the city. So I think that's been identified for a long time.
Okay, other questions? Thank y'all very much for being here.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
You got it, one night.
Have we
I'm checking.
number 2 as one of the top?